Shalom ve'erev tov, good evening. Welcome to our daily TV7 Israel news bulletin broadcast from Jerusalem. The terrorist regime in Iran repeatedly violates the ceasefire, raising prospects for miscalculation. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reveals Hezbollah has repeatedly breached agreements reached for de-escalation in Lebanon. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that he thinks President Trump should be given a chance to reach a negotiated resolution with Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran and its Lebanese proxy Hezbollah unabashedly and repeatedly violate the separate ceasefires reached, firing at civilian targets both in the Arabian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and in northern Israel.
I can tell you the Secretary General is alarmed by the reported exchange of fire overnight between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and also by reports that the Islamic Republic of Iran has targeted Kuwait and Bahrain. He is deeply troubled by the reports of civilian casualties. The Secretary General calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to avoid any further escalation that risks to undermine ongoing diplomatic efforts. The sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all countries must be fully respected.
The Ayatollah regime's terrorist arm, the RGC, has claimed that it targeted a U.S. naval vessel in the Gulf of Oman, to which U.S. Central Command responded, quote, "Iran is lying. U.S. military assets at sea continue to fly, sail, and operate safely and unimpeded." Moreover, in response to Iranian claims that it did not target Kuwait's international airport, CENTCOM highlighted that the Iranian attack against the civilian airport with drones was deliberately calculated and unjustified. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, in a testimony to the U.S. House of Representatives Foreign Relations Committee, explained the latest hostilities that have been clearly intensifying throughout the Gulf as of late.
A ship will go through the route, particularly both the northern and southern route of Hormuz. Those ships will come under attack. The U.S. will respond to that attack by shooting down those drones that are trying to sink a commercial civilian vessel illegally and unlawfully. At that point, the Iranians will respond to that by targeting some facility in the region in retribution. On occasion, in order to protect our own forces, we don't just strike the drones, we strike the people who launch those drones. These are completely defensive in nature, but they are happening in response to an Iranian action. If they don't shoot at those ships, we don't shoot.
Secretary Rubio further addressed the reason for President Trump's insistence on engaging with the Ayatollah regime by means of diplomacy, while further emphasizing that the United States, alongside Israel, launched the attack against the terror regime in Iran because it displayed clear intent of developing nuclear weapon capabilities, which is vehemently objected to by the majority of states.
It's not just that we say they can't have a nuclear weapon. Everyone says they can't have a nuclear weapon. The Chinese say they can't have a nuclear weapon. The Russians agree they couldn't have a nuclear weapon. But at a point, you have to do something about it. What Iran was trying to do was build a conventional shield of drones and missiles and a navy and capabilities. At some point, they would say to the world, now we're going to get a nuclear weapon, and you can't do anything about it because we have so many weapons and so many drones and so many naval vessels that the price we will inflict on you for trying to do something about it makes us untouchable, makes us immune. And the president was not going to allow them to build a conventional shield behind which they can develop their nuclear program. The Iranians suffered tremendous losses in personnel, and that includes top leadership of the IRGC and other elements of their government. What the president is alluding to is that there are certain individuals in the Iranian regime who have indicated both directly and indirectly a willingness to approach the future perhaps a little different. Not ideal. I'm not telling you, look, everybody talks about moderates in Iran. There are no moderates. There are radicals and super radicals, okay? That's been our view of it. But there are some of them that believe that they actually need to do a deal because their economy is in shambles. And so I think what the president is alluding to is that there are some individuals involved in the negotiations and in elements of their government, including some in elements of their military, that are more open to a deal than others.
America's top diplomat also addressed the latest phone conversation between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and set the record straight about the malign culprit which devastates Lebanon, revealing that an agreement was struck with Hezbollah roughly 2 weeks ago.
We had an agreement. Hezbollah reached out 2 weeks ago and basically said, about 10 days ago, and basically said, we will not launch missiles into Israeli territory if they stop attacking into Beirut. That was the agreement, I think 5 p.m. 2 Saturdays ago. At 6 p.m., they launched missiles. And then they came back and said, well, we made a mistake. We thought it started tomorrow, not Saturday. Then they went again and violated it again on Sunday.
But also Israel has been bombing and launching throughout. Is that correct?
Well, there's two separate things. Actually, Israel has not conducted massive operations in Beirut for some time. What you see them operating is in the south. And what they are, what we've always said, and it's part of the joint statement, we've always said is Israel has a right to act in its defense. So here's what happens in the south. I'm just going to speak colloquially as best I can. The Israelis see Hezbollah moving around, maybe even launching a missile from the south, and they action it in defense. They go after it in the southern portion. And that's what we're seeing in many cases is these defensive strikes. What they're increasingly doing is taking more territory in the south to deny them launching space. Because understand, these rockets are being launched into northern villages and cities in Israel, and populations can't even return to their homes as a result of it. In the case of what happened the other day, the following was happening. We had indications, multiple indications, that Israel may be considering conducting anti-Hezbollah strikes inside of Beirut. And at that moment, we had reach out from the Lebanese authorities saying that Hezbollah had contacted them and said if Israel doesn't strike Beirut, that they would stop launching missiles into Israeli territory. That's the message we got, and that's what the president pursued and said, okay, I had this outreach. If you won't do these strikes in Beirut, they'll stop launching against you in northern Israel. Unfortunately, within an hour or two of that conversation, they launched 2 waves of rockets from Hezbollah against Israel in Israeli territory. So it's an ongoing challenge. I think one of the reasons why we're engaged in these talks between Lebanon and Israel is understanding that Hezbollah is not just an enemy of Israel. Hezbollah is an enemy of Lebanon. They are an enemy of the Lebanese government. They have called for the overthrow of the Lebanese government.
Earlier, in an exclusive interview to CNBC, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also addressed the heated phone conversation reported on that took place between him and President Trump vis-a-vis Lebanon.
President confirmed that he said, you're effing crazy. How did you react to that? What really happened in that call?
Well, I'm not going to get into details of our conversations. We've had thousands, well, a lot of them. And if you think this is a crisis, you should be in some other conversations. But we've always found a way. We have so many agreements. We agree on the main things. We want to get Iran, the nuclear program in Iran, finished. We want to make sure that Iran doesn't pose a threat to Israel, to the Middle East, to America, that it doesn't develop nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them, not only to Israel and to every capital in Europe, but to every city in the United States. That's our common goal. That's what we set out to do. And to expand the circle of peace, as the President and I did in the Abraham Accords together. So we have common goals. Sometimes we have, as in the best of families, you have these tactical disagreements. We always find a way to work them out. And we do so as great friends. We can disagree in the morning, and by the afternoon, we're common action.
So I was going to say, has your relationship at all shifted with him?
No. This has been a great relationship because he's been the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House, and he respects me. I respect him. We always find a way to work out our differences.
Prime Minister Netanyahu was further asked as to what President Trump expects from Israel when it comes to fighting Hezbollah.
I think he understands that Lebanon has been taken hostage by Hezbollah. It's basically taken over the country. It's an Iranian proxy that puts all the citizens of Lebanon at gunpoint and uses Lebanon as a platform to launch terror missiles into our cities, to launch killer drones against our civilians. And so if we want to save Lebanon, and if we want to get a Lebanese-Israeli peace, as I do, we have to disarm Hezbollah, and we have to demilitarize Lebanon.
The Israeli leader was further asked about growing rebuke emanating out of European capitals about Israel's defensive measures against Hezbollah in Lebanon.
President Macron of France this week said there's no justification for the major escalation by Israel in Lebanon.
No,
how do you respond to that?
The escalation is from Hezbollah. We had a ceasefire. They violated it. Look, the way European leaders cater to radical Islamic minorities in their own countries Shameful. Because they know the truth. They know that when we act against Iran, that caused death to America, death to Israel, death to everything in between that is not part of their Islamist radical ilk, they know we're protecting them as well. But they don't have the guts to stand up and line up with the right thing that will save our civilization against these barbarians.
Following remarks by President Trump, who had cited that Iran had essentially agreed not to pursue nuclear weapon capabilities, Prime Minister Netanyahu was asked whether he could trust the Iranians to abide by any type of agreement.
President Trump saying today that Iran has already agreed that it will not have a nuclear weapon. Do you trust that? Is that good enough for you?
Well, I think it's a precondition, but you have to make sure that they actually don't do it, because they always lie and they always cheat. And therefore, you have to have a way to get out the nuclear material and to dismantle the infrastructure that they have, the enrichment sites for uranium to make atomic bombs. I think all that is on the table. And I think the president believes that he can get this through diplomatic pressure and tough negotiations, and I think he should be given a chance.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News, which is made possible by the generosity of our viewers. Please keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and redemption of Israel. I'm Jonathan Essen, wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and God willing, until our next update, Shalom from Jerusalem.